Recording is on.
There we go. All right. There she is. All right. Cool. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Takt Artist Talks. This time we are lucky to have Clovis McEvoy with us. I'm going to introduce him a little bit, and then we're going to listen to or watch a presentation as well. Just an easygoing conversation, room for discussion. So Clovis is an award-winning composer, sound artist, and researcher. Clovis specializes in creating experiential installations for virtual reality, mixed media, and musical works for instruments and electronics. His works have been performed in America, France, England, Italy, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Portugal, and Switzerland. An active researcher, Clovis has presented papers on audio-visual relationships, virtual music, and compositional practice at conferences in Japan, Italy, and New Zealand. And with that, I will now mute myself, and the stage is yours.
All right, let me just see if I can hijack the screen for a second. I thought I would start just by showing you guys a little bit of what I've been working on at the moment. So let me know if everyone can see my screen, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So a little while ago now, I got a large commission from the New Zealand government to begin working on a virtual reality artwork that integrated interview materials, music, storytelling into a kind of sort of a hybrid archive where people's opinions, thoughts, memories can all sort of be experienced and interacted with in a new way. Tentatively, I'm titling this work Human Ruins. And at the moment, I'm still quite in the early stages, but I've been playing around with, starting to play around with the visual material that I'm going to be working with. And because a lot of this, the thematic material is going to be made up of interviews that I'm conducting remotely with New Zealanders from the other side of the world, part of the visuals that I want to work with are going to be humanoid in shape, in some way related to the human form. What I have on the screen here is certainly probably not what it's going to look like when all is said and done, but these are the kind of things I'm playing around with. So just to take probably a step back, the purpose of the work was actually conceived during the COVID-19 pandemic, right at the start. And for a long time, I'd been quite interested in memory and experience and all the little stories and things from everyday people that get lost or kind of shunted to the side. And it occurred to me that with a global pandemic that specifically was impacting older generations, that there was a need to try to reach out and to capture some of these experiences, these lived experiences from people in the nation of New Zealand. And so I've sort of been slowly conducting interview materials, and the idea, once it is finally finished, is that there will be kind of abstract objects, audiovisual objects, and audience members will then have the opportunity to interact with these audiovisual objects. And depending on how they interact, the way that they interact, they'll then be told a story, or at least the fragment of a story. As they listen more and as they hear more and more information about people's lives, these objects sort of fragment and change and reform into something that is more humanoid. I definitely wanted to incorporate elements of nature and the natural environment, because I think for a lot of New Zealanders, the relationship they have to the natural world is quite a close one. There's a lot of thought given to the landscape and how that informs people's lives and national identity. So I've been playing around with these sort of humanoid skeletal meshes, and if anyone's thinking that I'm a master 3D modeler, I'm not. These are actually free open source skeletons that you can get. but I'm then taking them and modifying them so that they look less obviously human. And so these are skeletal meshes that have been merged with rock formations, canyon formations, moss, and in this case, sort of a close approximation of greenstone, which is a sort of a very famous stone from New Zealand that that is quite precious to the nation. So yeah, I thought I'd start off by just looking at some of the things that I've been playing around with over the last couple of months and my current work in progress. So really, that's all I've got to say for the beginning. I just thought I'd sort of start things off there. And now I'm going to hand back to Ben. And cool.
Cool. Thank you for showing that. That's fascinating. I went ahead and wrote down some notes.
Cool.
For myself. And I think you've seen these, but let's just dive in. So the first question that I wrote was, what inspired you to take on such experimental and challenging projects via VR?
I think I've always had a general interest in new things and things that are very current. Originally, I studied as a instrumental composer, so working with violins and pianos and things like that. And while I do enjoy, I most certainly do enjoy that kind of art music, I started to feel quite frustrated and just sort of chafing at the weight of historical tradition around it. These things have been around for such a long time, and many people have worked very, very hard to push these instruments to the absolute limits of what they can do. And I started to feel like, well, why don't I just start looking at hybrid instruments, new ways of making music so that I can find new ways of expressing. And so really moving to VR felt like a fairly natural progression in terms of what I'm interested in. But also, as I was kind of just reading and researching, I began to realize that from the fields of psychology and medicine, that they were finding that VR has can have a very profound effect on the human brain. It can be really, really powerful. And that made my ears perk up a little bit. And I instantly thought, well, if it can be that powerful for treating phobias and PTSD and even the sensation of pain and things like this, then what are the artistic applications? How could it be used for other things? And that was about actually more like 6 years ago now. So I started experimenting in 2015, and it slowly ended up taking up all my time and focus. Yeah,
that's interesting. I hear the classical elements in your work, and it's fascinating. This is kind of a perfect segue to question 2. It's funny how that happens. Where do you think the line is between artist's intention and audience perception? How do you craft and compose experiences that traverse this boundary?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because theoretically, when you're working with virtual environments, the artist or the composer has more control than ever before. You are literally shaping the environment. You're shaping everything that's happening within the virtual space. So in some ways, you have more artistic intention than in almost any other medium. But at the same time, the audience member has more freedom. So the audience, you could have a work that the heart and soul of the work is here, but the audience is looking over here, and they're not paying any attention to it. And that is a very hard thing to control. And I've had experiences with this, and you end up learning quite a bit about the human psyche and how people acclimatize to things. And I think there's a growing sort of a field of design that is examining how do you design virtual reality experiences that account for many different ways that people might want to behave. My own personal approach is that at some point you have to let go. So I build things, and they have a lot of significance to me personally, and I have my preferred way that they should be experienced. But you have to kind of, you have to trust the audience to kind of experience it and get something out of it in some way, shape, or form. An example of this that I'll say is that in a recent work called Pillars of Introspection, the piece really hangs on a moment where it moves from non-interactive to interactive. So the audience has spent the entire time just sort of looking at stuff, not doing anything. And then at a certain point, it is open for their voice. If they speak or make a sound, suddenly things will start to happen. And I originally had thought that people would just naturally say something or do something at this point in the work, and they absolutely did not. And the first time I exhibited it, some people stood there in complete silence in a blank virtual space for upwards of 10 minutes because there was no instruction encouraging them to do anything. And so it was a real learning experience for me about what I assumed the audience would do versus what they actually do. So a lot of trial and error, I would say.
Interesting. So what kind of, I don't want to ask you for the, any trade secrets here, but like, what kind of methods, what kind of tools, what kind of, I don't want to say tricks, but like, yeah, methods perhaps is the best word.
I think that the most direct method is that you can at any point, you can get data about where they are looking. And so you can stick something directly in front of their face at any point if you want to. But of course, you have to then consider that that's quite intrusive. It's very much in their face, and you have to consider the implications of that. Is that how if you want to present something that's very delicate, very nuanced, maybe you specifically want them to have a sense of discovery, that they discovered this moment of insight, then chucking it plonk straight in front of their vision is debatable. So there are ways, and so the VR systems give a extraordinary amount of data back to you in terms of where they are, where they're looking, how fast they're moving, and all of that can be potentially used to form the experience. But in my experience so far, it's that you sort of have your assumptions, and then you test it on some people, and then you have to go back and refine the work, which is probably, obviously quite a different working process than in other art forms where you know how someone is going to walk up and look at a painting on a wall, or you have a rough idea how they're going to do that.
Yeah. You don't have a lot of the traditional scaffolding, like a lot of the structures and expectations. So you kind of have to create the threshold of experience, which is super fascinating to me. I like the way that you're describing this work, because VR has been around for quite some time in the time of my life, because I'm quite young. But I find it very interesting the way you talk about it. It's refreshing. Thank you. And the next question that I have for you is kind of a big one. But it kind of talks about this interaction. One thing I really enjoy about your work is that it sounds like you put a big emphasis on the audience shedding their audience hood and becoming active participants in your pieces. This is present in both the presentation of your pieces, but also the creation of the pieces themselves. Would you say your work falls in the category of social art and social practice in any sense?
I think yes, at least specifically in terms of VR. My previous work I've done, I would say, has actually been very introspective, very inwardly looking. Social issues were touched on, but very much touched on from the perspective of me personally, without trying to directly affect or change anyone's opinion about anything. VR has been a little bit different in that I have, both in terms of the stuff I'm making, but also in terms of my research, I've become very, very interested in what I describe as experiential metaphors, where VR offers quite a unique opportunity to make the metaphor you're working with a functional part of the experience, from the way someone moves to what they see, what they hear, what they act. The whole the whole arc of an experience can itself serve as a metaphor for the artistic work. And to me, that instantly kind of feeds into the possibility for a kind of personal growth, or at least some sense of insight and discovery. And yeah, I think I had some moments where I was exhibiting this work, Pillars of Introspection, in Australia, and some of the audience reactions I got were really quite something. And I had people who felt quite affected by it, because the work moves from a space that's quite threatening and imposing and makes you feel a little bit uneasy, to a place that is quite childlike and playful, and you can just create things using your voice and the sound of your singing. And yeah, I got the response I got from people sort of made me, I was surprised. It was not my full intention to create something that made people feel like they'd had this self-discovery moment, but I got a little bit of that back, and that made me feel like, oh, there's something in this. And so while I would say that not historically, no, I would say no, historically I wasn't doing anything to do with social art, but going forward, yes, I think I want these experiences to leave people with some sort of some larger sense of themselves. I actually think it's got a lot of potential to tackle big picture issues like climate change or social change and things like that, because one of the interesting things about VR is that you have the audience's undivided attention. They are in the experience, and they really are putting a huge amount of focus on whatever you are showing them. So if you decide to show them something that is socially minded, you are really going to reach people in a way that you can't do with TV or radio, or something that is just stimulating one sense instead of multiple senses.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like so much new information. Like I've always thought about the saying in English that seeing is believing, and just thinking about the architecture of the actual. I don't even know what you call them. I guess, what would you call the VR goggles? Would you call them goggles? What do you call them?
Yeah, goggles are. Some people just call it the headset.
Headset. There we go.
Yeah.
Oculus headset. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting, and I think it's also interesting that you, in your response, I see this in a lot of VR art as well, that there's a very careful boundary between trying to come from someplace where the artist has not been, and this can be a very charged thing. It's cool to see people who are not, you included in this, is that you're not trying to come from someplace you haven't been. That's cool. I think that's admirable. And in your opinion, how do the visuals of your work and the audio inform one another? Is there a synesthetic connection to be had that is made easier and perhaps even possible via the technology?
Yeah, I think, and this is actually, I mean, this is a huge area of research in visual music. So there's lots of people who've done a lot of research in how you integrate sound and vision, and how you create abstract sounds and abstract visuals that feel integrated and realistic. And so that's something that I was quite interested in before I ever got into VR to begin with. So for me, they absolutely do need to have a sense of sort of a sense of internal logic to them. Obviously, you might be putting an audience member into a space, a virtual space that is impossible. It couldn't exist in the real world. But within that space, there has to be a logic. It has to sound like, if it's impossible, what is the sound of an impossible space? What does an unbelievable object sound like, and how does it echo around the space? Without those little details, people do not buy it. They lose their sense of immersion and presence. And if you don't have that, if they don't buy it, you're not going to get that visceral gut reaction that you're looking for. They're not going to act and behave as they would in the real world. And that's what you're really looking for. So yeah, I think there's things called what's called parametric mapping, where you're basically using data to link up, say, a frequency with a color. So if the color changes, the frequency changes, and lots of things making these little relationships so that as the visuals change or evolve, the sound is perfectly matching and moving with it. And it sounds kind of sciencey and arbitrary, but very quickly you follow those kinds of steps and you make those connections, and the brain goes, ah, that thing moved and a sound happened. Clearly,
Right.
clearly that's where it all comes from. You know, we're quite simple in some ways when it comes down to it.
Yeah. I love that you really lean on the capabilities of the brain. It's super cool. So essentially the way that I'm now understanding this is that the VR is essentially you're creating a system which is in itself is a composition where things lean on each other and support one another. That's really beautiful. Cool. I think I got to start getting into VR. Thanks, Clovis. And I guess the last question that I had for you before I open it up for everyone else, if anyone has any questions, is what do you reckon are the next steps for VR and for you?
I mean, there's lots of cool gadgets that are obviously sort of coming along. So there's these really cool what are called haptic gloves that they've been working on for a while that might come out one day, which basically they're gloves that you would wear and they are tracked, but they have little motors in the joints so that when you pick up a virtual object, it feels like it has resistance and weight. So you can actually grab things and lift them up, and also there's all that kind of stuff that's slowly coming along, which is, you know, is very exciting from a geeky new toys kind of viewpoint. I think AR, what's called, you know, augmented reality, is a really exciting area, and there was lots of big news over the last few weeks about Apple planning to release an AR headset. You know, very, very, very expensive, but very, very high powered, and all this kind of stuff. The interesting potential there is that rather than putting people purely within a virtual environment, you can overlay and augment the real world. So the potential of, say, watching a dancer perform a choreographed routine, but at the same time embellishing that and heightening it and coupling it with color and things that are generated and look as if they are really attached to the body and intermingling with the person. That's all, you know, that's fascinating stuff, and I really look forward to seeing what's going to happen over the next few years with all that. For me personally, I think there's a need to develop a better understanding of the language of VR, certainly from a musical point of view. Like, how do you effectively go about communicating artistic ideas in a virtual space? There isn't a huge amount of repertoire to look to. There aren't thousands of works. There aren't a huge amount of, like, you know, you can go and you can find screen printing techniques, and you can find painting brush techniques. The techniques for building in VR are very much focused on video game, architecture, automotive design. There's not a lot of well-trodden material on how you go about artistic creation in VR. And so that's an area where I'm working on a research article at the moment that kind of proposes some ideas of a language for virtual art music. That's where I'm kind of spending a lot of my time in the next few years.
Cool. I got to ask one last arbitrary question. It might be a critical one in some sense, not of you, but of the genre of the technologies. Do you, as someone who's worked with the technology for the last 10, 15, 6 years, sorry. My bad. You've worked with it for a while, and you've seen a lot of changes and shifts. Do you see any potential downsides to having images projected? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think there's actually quite a lot of downsides. I think it's very elitist. It's very exclusionary by its nature. You have one person at a time in a virtual experience, which there's a cost of the barrier to entry of having the headsets. So that's exclusionary to begin with. When you try to show the work in a gallery space, you have to do it one person at a time, which is hugely time consuming. I had one exhibition where I was there 12 hours a day for like 3 days, and I probably got through 50 people, because, and it was great to have that many people, but that's how long it takes to get the headset on, and you have to be safe and all this kind of stuff. So there are real problems to doing it as an artistic medium, and one is the cost of the equipment and the teething issues of how you present this work. And also there's always the chance that it'll just kind of fizzle out. Everyone was talking about VR back in the early 90s and nothing happened. Everyone's talking about, well, a lot of people are talking about VR now, maybe nothing will happen. However, my instinct is that if you get a chance to try the current generation of VR headsets, there is something there that is quite special, which is why massive companies like Google and Apple are investing in it, and they think that there's something here. So I don't think it's going to fizzle out, but I think there's a lot of work to be done to make it accessible to people. It's not accessible at the moment at all. Yeah. So I don't exactly know how you fix that.
Me neither.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now, and if anyone has any questions for Clovis, please hit it.
Hi, I would like to start. Hi,
hello
everybody. I just wanted to point on your technique. What kind of technique are you working with, and also software? So can you explain it a bit? Is that possible?
Yeah. So I've had two. I kind of have two main ways that I work. So one way is that I previously in works I have designed the sound or the musical material as the starting point. So I have the sound, and then I move into the visual space, and I'm trying to create visuals that I feel evoke or in some way integrate with the sonic materials. At the moment, I'm going the other way. So I'm starting with the visuals, and then later on, I'll be trying to use the sound or change the sound to fit with the visuals that I'm creating. In terms of the actual techniques that I'm using to make the visuals, really it's chaos, because I have no formal training or like coding experience. So most of what I do is reverse engineering. So there's a huge amount of amazing free resources out there where you can get meshes of chairs or cars or humans, and then you break it, you deconstruct it, and you find out, oh, if I do that, that breaks, so that must do this. And then you start to kind of you end up with these accidental textures and forms that are in some way pleasing. So it's quite, in a way, it's sort of abstract. I'm messing with things and then selecting the things that I feel, the things that make me feel something. All the software that I use is free and open, not exactly open source, but it's all free software. So I use what's called Unreal Engine 4, which I would highly recommend. I think it's fantastic. And on the musical side, I've used a few different solutions over the years. At this current project, I'm trying to do everything within the game engine, Unreal Engine 4, which will make things a little bit easier.
Thank you. I just have one question more about your headset. Can you recommend headset to someone who begins, or I know there are different sets on the market and different companies. Can you say something about that?
Maybe I am biased. I've extensively used what's called the HTC Vive, and I'm very, very happy with it and its capabilities. I know that the Oculus also is very, very good. I haven't had the chance to use it extensively. I've used it a little bit, and it was fine. So I err away from Oculus simply because they've started doing things like the headset won't work unless you have a Facebook account. So because Facebook bought Oculus, they're trying to tie it all in with the platform, and I'm not interested in that at all. So I have gone for HTC Vive, and just their basic consumer model, which is rapidly lowering in price, it's got everything you need to get started, and also have very, very high quality motion tracking. And so I've done some works that actually don't use the headset at all, but make use of the motion tracking. So works for dancer, so motion tracking of dancers and things like this, which is sort of a second use of the technology. So that would be my recommendation at the moment.
Thank you.
Hey, can I jump in?
Did anyone else have any other questions?
Hey,
Can you hear
Stump.
me?
I can hear you.
Hey, Clovis. Oh, yeah. I just wanted to kind of like ask about, so you talk about the limitations because people don't really know how to interact maybe with the VR headsets when they first get it on. Do you see like a point in the future where it is more accessible so people don't spend a bit of time going, oh, this is cool, how do I use this? And then can just directly engage? Or do you think there's always going to be like this, like it's always going to be a little bit out of reach, so people won't be able to engage with it as deeply because it's still something new and exciting to them every time they get to see it?
I mean, it's hard to say for certain. I think it's, who knows how good the technology will become. If the technology becomes as easy as putting on a pair of sunglasses, then by all means, it could end up being something that everyone has experienced. Everyone has a pair, just like they have a TV. Maybe. For, I would say, at least the next 10 years, if not longer, it will be something that is fairly niche, fairly new, and requires quite special handling in terms of how people approach it. Because as you alluded to, it's sort of, I've had the experience that if you put anything artistically important right at the start of the work, no one's going to see it. Because the first thing anyone does is they put on the headset and then they look all around themselves and they kind of look down at their feet. Maybe they crouch down or jump. They want to test the limits. They want to see how far they can push anything. And it's only after a few minutes that they actually stop and start looking at the artistic stuff. So, maybe with big companies like Apple starting to release new versions, maybe it'll be like the new iPhone and everyone will buy one and suddenly it'll become something that people are more familiar with. But at the moment, I see it being a bit hard to show people for quite some time.
Cool, thank you. Can I ask another question?
By all means.
Because you know I'm a story nerd. Can you tell me about this New Zealand project you mentioned at the start? Have you started collecting stories from people? What are people saying, and how's that all going? Like, what shape?
No, it's good. It's going slower than it should have. I should be making more progress than I am, but I am getting the interview material, and it's really interesting. I'm wanting to get people's senses of their memories of the country when they were children, how the country has changed over time, both in terms of the landscape, the weather, the natural environment. Most people in New Zealand back in the 70s and 80s, everyone had what they called the quarter-acre dream. Everyone had a big garden. It was sort of suburban paradise kind of a vibe, and that's really not how the country is anymore. And so it's quite interesting hearing people talk about how the country has changed in terms of the social aspects. Poverty has hugely increased over the last 20 or 30 years. And so I'm trying to sort of I've been trying to get a bit of stories about how people viewed the country and themselves in their youth, and how they kind of feel about it now. Yeah, but I'm sort of trying to get a little bit of everything. So a little bit of like the social, the land, and then interpersonal things. So little odd things that people will remember about someone insulting them as a kid, or making them feel bad, or a time they felt self-conscious, or just whatever is coming to mind. And so so far I've got a handful of interviews, to be honest, with people I know. So these are people who were very easy to get to agree to be interviewed by me, friends and family. But I'm hoping to begin interviewing more widely over the next few weeks, because I theoretically will be finishing the work by the end of the year. So I need to get moving on that.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If nobody else has questions, I can keep talking.
Well, you've got infinite questions, I'm sure.
I do, but I don't want to take over from anyone else.
I'm not fussed. If no one else, anyone can jump in at any time. But if you've got like another question, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to, like, on the idea of like memory, are you doing anything about, I guess, current memory, and asking people about their current kind of situations, because these will become memories at some point, and like, you know, whether you're interviewing people concurrently and then talking back about, I don't know, I'm just kind of like thinking about, you know, we're living in a really interesting time that people are going to talk about. Are you documenting what these memories will be, and then maybe in the future you can look back and make comparative?
Yeah, it's most definitely. I don't just want to capture information about what New Zealand was like decades ago. I want to know what things are, what people are experiencing right now. And so I want to interview people of very different age ranges, from, you know, people who are older to very, very young. I've been thinking about making this work for a very long time. It sort of stems from an experience I had as a young kid, where I got kind of strong-armed into going on a Christian camp. I was not religious, and I didn't actually realize it was a Christian camp at the time, but I went along. And one of the things they did is they sent us to a retirement home to get people to swear to the Lord before they died, which was a really, really interesting experience for a 9-year-old. But I remember being fascinated by the stories that these people were telling me. I was talking to people who had fought in the Second World War and all these kinds of things. And I remember thinking about, at the time, as a young person, just being fascinated by these moments in history and these very, very unique personal stories that were largely forgotten and were just going to slip away. And so at the moment, it's quite an odd situation being in England on the other side of the world and interviewing people via Zoom, and trying across this massive distance to get a sense of what New Zealand is like during this pandemic, what it's like right now, what people are experiencing, how they feel about the current moment, and going back in time. So the questions that I'm asking people are evolving with each interview. So every time I finish an interview, I'm kind of getting a sense of what I should be asking the next time. So, yeah.
Did anyone repent to God?
Yeah. Yeah, there were a few. Well, thank you for the questions, Stump. And I don't want to keep everyone for too long. But if anyone's got a final question, be my guest. Otherwise, we can wrap up. Going once, going twice.
Did you repent to God?
I think I did. I think I made it last about a week. And then I think at the time my older sister was practicing Wiccanism, and so very quickly she was like, "Oh, what are you doing? What?" Yeah, and so that didn't last too long.
Right, we'll get you on your deathbed.
Mm-hmm,
Okay, I'll shut up now.
mm-hmm. Well, it was. Before we finish, I'd like to just say thank you to Takt, and thank you so much, Ben, for taking the time to look into my work and write those questions. It was a real pleasure, and yeah, this was great.